Hello. Good afternoon.
We are live, Senate Education Committee, May 20th, 1:30 in the afternoon, 1:45. And we are taking a look at the proposed amendment to H480, having to do with CTEs. And we have first, I think you know, first on, we have Secretary Saunders first on the list. And just so people aren't surprised, I have to leave it to go to the House Education Committee. Senator Weeks will take over, but we'll get started. And so we have, well, that's all I'll say about it. We had this amendment, we've walked through it, and we're seeking comments from people who might have interest. So
Excellent. Well, good afternoon. For the record, I'm Zoe Saunders, Secretary of Education.
And I'm Ruth Durkee. I'm the State Director of Career Technical Education.
And thank you for inviting us to provide input on the amendment included the CTE language. We understand that the goal of this amendment is to expand access to career and technical education. And we don't think that the amendment is necessary given the existing statute that allows for the flexibility that this is designed to promote. We know you're hearing from a lot of different stakeholders, different CTE directors potentially. And I think what we give is a statewide view. So we have been really engaged in the work around CTE reform in earnest for the last 2 years and deeply doing work around the study. And part of that has been bringing together CTE directors from across the state to provide input and identifying what the challenges are and the opportunities. And through that process, there's not always consensus across CTE directors in that work. I think what we're looking to bring forward in our review is our understanding of what is currently allowable with the existing statute to meet, I think, the intent. But we also want to take an opportunity to highlight some more of the systemic challenges, which I think are important to bring forward and would not be addressed with this amendment. And so in this testimony, we've responded directly to the amendment. And we've also included some additional background to give you further context around this work that's happened over the last 2 years around the study, the recommendations that have come forward related to funding reform and also governance reform that are designed to address many of the systemic barriers that I'm sure we will talk about today. And that I think in part this amendment is aimed to address. So wanted to give you that framing as we get into this discussion. So Ruth will walk you through really our analysis and our recommendation that it would not be necessary. And then with time permitting, we'd like to be able to have that broader conversation around some of the systemic challenges facing and also the opportunities ahead of us. We've done a lot of work in CTE over the last 2 years and have a really clear path forward to strengthening career technical education and providing more opportunities to students. For this legislative session, most of our work around CTE has been with the House Commerce and Economic Development Committee, but we can bring forward some additional documentation to share with you and supporting that thinking. As you know, it'll likely be more of a conversation for next session when you're diving deeper into some equality. So with that, I will turn it over to Ruth.
Thank you. So when I received the proposed amendment, I was asked to take a look and see what the law and State Board of Education will currently allow and whether additional revision is needed. So 16 VSA 1541A does provide the ability, does require that a school board of a sending district, if a student is in grade 11 or 12 and the Career Technical Center for their region does not offer a course of study that they wish to take, the sending district must pay tuition for the student to attend a program in another CTE district service region, but the district of residence is not responsible for providing transportation. So the student has a right to go, the district of residence must pay the tuition, but transportation is not provided. Then we have State Board of Education Rule 2374.3A, which expands on that because it says not only can students apply for enrollment into programs outside their service region when their service region center does not provide the program. They also may apply if they are not able to enroll in the program of their choice at their center. So if the program was full, if it was a wait list, that provision currently allows for that flexibility. And again, it provides that the district of residence shall be required to pay the tuition, but not to provide transportation. The transportation provision in statute is found in 1563, which provides that career technical education, the goal is to provide access to students and to really make it possible for them to attend CTE, and that transportation assistance shall be paid from the education fund to school districts that provide transportation to and from the career technical education center in the designated service region or in other locations. And we frequently, well, semi-frequently in my time at the agency, I've been in this role since 2020. I worked in career technical education in Vermont since 1999. Frequently over the past several years, we have provided guidance when we've had CTE centers or spending districts reach out to us about the transportation question. And the consistent response has been that if a CTE center wants to provide transportation to students within their service region or outside their service region, they will receive the transportation reimbursement funds that are currently provided for in statute. And most recently, we had that conversation just a few weeks ago with Central Vermont Career Center and Randolph Technical Career Center. I think you'll talk about Central Vermont later, because they are looking at an opportunity next year where for some waitlisted programs that they have, students will have applied to and been accepted at Randolph, and Randolph will send a bus, I believe, to collect them and receive the transportation assistance. So those pieces are currently in place.
Does the school district, the student in which the student is a student, have to assent to that happening, or can the child go if that's what they want to do?
If the student applies and is accepted and is in at least 11th grade, they have to pay the tuition. So they don't get the right to veto that option.
Okay.
We get those questions as well.
Yeah.
Frequently, those are the school districts that reach out to us for clarification.
Can they negotiate a payment amount different than the tuition?
No, they're responsible for the announced tuition for the center that the student attends.
Why is that not flexible? Is that not flexible because of something at the state level, or?
I am not the right finance expert to answer that, but I can tell you that my understanding has been that there are specific provisions about how CTE tuition is calculated, published, announced, and that rests with the CTE center, and that we don't have mechanisms to have different provisions for a student from one school for one district to be paying one rate and another district to be paying a different rate.
Could the state change that? Couldn't we just say they're allowed to accept a student for the rate that the student would pay for their home CTE, but there's a wait list, and so if the other CTE is willing to accept it, they could take that lower amount?
I think Senator Hensel, you're pointing to a really important issue that we should look at, because there is variability in the cost per pupil depending on the tech center and program. And so there is a need for us to really think around how we can be fair and transparent with how the programs are funded. And some of the, you have links to subsequent reports that will be able to show you that analysis of the spending. And that is an area where we really need to examine. It was part of the reason I think it's important to look at CTE funding and governance reform holistically as part of a larger quality conversation. And we did do that analysis around spending.
I'm looking.
And we have done just that.
Yeah.
Bill that we passed out of here.
Okay,
Right.
I'm looking at page 3
Okay.
of your memo, and I guess I'm not saying fair and transparent all sounds great, but I'm also saying flexible and common sense, right? So it points out this problem as though it's insurmountable, that there are different tuition amounts, that Stafford's at $21,300 and that Hannaford's at $31,900. Why hasn't the state been able to figure out a way to find some place in the middle for the tuition to land if there are students that are not able to access CTE because of it?
So I think our Our approach has been to look at this and address these challenges systemically. So I think what you're asking is what is sort of the short-term solution to
In an
Funding,
economic
yes.
crisis, yes, I am asking to look at it in the context of it being like a literal crime if students want to get a career education and can't right now.
Well, I'm not sure.
I'm not sure
to
that
characterize as.
I'm not
crime.
sure that
I do think we have this in 454 to look at specifically because of this challenge. But we ran out of runway this session to do that analysis. So it's in the study between now and January.
I thought you said you just finished a study.
so we've done 2 years of a study and we put forward a holistic recommendation for funding, governance and quality reform for the career technical education system.
But you never put that before this committee.
That was part of the overall approach that we put forward, in the governor's proposal. And we've had a lot of subsequent conversations around that.
But you never sent us language.
Would have loved for the committee to invite us to do that type of a deep dive. But I think your question, I'm not exactly clear on. I don't know the specific problem that you're addressing. I think what we're saying and what Ruth is communicating is that where there have been challenges with access and career and technical education programs, our team has been supporting the field in navigating with existing statute to ensure that students can participate in career and technical education training. What you're calling out, though, is a systemic issue, and that the way that we're funding the system is quite variable across Vermont, even for the same program. And when we did the analysis, that spending related to quality is mixed. And so we proposed to have funding aligned to that analysis that would promote greater transparency and that we would have a process to support that quality. But I think in the short term, we're navigating some of the challenges that you're describing student by student within the existing statute to ensure that there are not barriers to access.
So are you saying, that's kind of what I started by asking, is it a statutory barrier that you can't negotiate between two technical centers that, hey, this is the amount we usually set aside for a CTE student, so that's what we could afford to pay you, other CTE next door?
I think I'm just gonna say let me answer it in the way that it sometimes lands on my desk, and then we can explore
Okay.
where it gets complicated.
Mhm.
I think everyone's intent is to collaborate to provide access. Where it gets tricky, and we can use the specific examples that are here. I gave you both Patricia Hannaford Career Center and Stafford Technical Center, but I also gave you the ranges from 13,900 at Northwest.
But maybe we could just
So if we focus on the
Stafford and
okay.
Hannaford.
So if we look at that,
Yeah.
you're right. The sending high schools that send to Stafford Technical Center are planning on a per student,
Mhm.
per full-time student cost of what to Stafford. And it would be more for them to go to Hannaford, and we would certainly, you want to encourage them to have that access. The challenges become how you then don't have the high schools and districts that send to Hannaford Career Center saying if you can provide a discounted rate for some students, we need to relook at how do we set a system that doesn't provide different rates for different students when you have to have an overall center budget that's met? And I think that's a complex piece, but that's where our more systemic work has said, we know the system is less than ideal.
Mhm.
And Senator, I've worked in career technical education since 1999. And every year we've talked about the fact that the CT funding system could be changed and strengthened. And I think we all support that goal. I think the goal is to find a model that solves the problem statewide. And
Mhm.
I understand also wanting to not limit access in the short term, but I
Yeah.
think we have to, but I think that sometimes we create solutions that lead to other challenges that we
Sure.
don't foresee. And how do we best avoid that?
That's
And so-
extremely helpful. I'm just surprised we didn't see that proposal this year.
Didn't see what proposal.
A CTE proposal.
So we had many joint hearings where we laid out the components of the governor's proposal, which included CTE. And we were clear about reflecting on the feedback we heard from our CTE directors. One of the challenges that we've talked about and we've talked about in this committee is sometimes there's a competition for funding or a perceived competition for funding. And so part of the approach that we put forward was really understanding the shared responsibility for educating the student at the Career Technical Center and at the sending school. So in the materials we've shared with you, around the funding proposal, we identified the weight for CTE, and we clearly communicated part of that weight would stay with the sending school, to support with the additional support for that child, understanding that there's shared ownership. So there has been, work put
Are you
forward.
talking about a PowerPoint, David? I mean, has anyone else seen the statutory language that would constitute a proposal in this regard?
We haven't talked enough about CTE at all at this session to say that we addressed this because we didn't even put it in.
It's true. Yeah, we have. So we own part of this, that, we didn't even get to the point of waiting out CTE as a wait
Correct.
until the 9th hour, when, actually it came from,
Well, and that's also why we came back into your committee, because we had concerns that there was not a focus on CTE. And we've been really clear since the beginning of the legislative session that one of the explicit goals we articulated was to expand career technical education and starting in middle school. And so
It does help if you come in between the beginning and the end.
Yes, I would wish that you had focused on CTE. And
Okay.
yeah, Chair. So let's, Senator Huffman.
So my question would be, right now it's 32,000 to 21,000. But the Hannaford Career Center all of a sudden says, oh, we're going to get an influx of another 150 students. Now, maybe this is a question for the doctor from Hannaford Center. Would that adjust that 32,000? Would it get more closer to the 21,000?
They said it would.
Correct.
So, and what is is it just before the school year we know? The end of, next, when students go to sign up, when would you roughly have that indication of how close your numbers may or may not be to the existing CTE?
As soon as we had enrollment for the school year, we would know, and we receive our,
Can you identify yourself?
oh, sorry. My name is Dr. Nicole McTavish. I'm the superintendent and director of Hannaford Career Center. So as soon as we have our enrollment, we know how many students we're going to be putting against the cost, right? The fixed cost of the center. And one of the intents of this amendment is that we would be able to adjust our tuition. We have no interest in collecting more tuition than we need. And if we had more enrollment, we would be able to charge less tuition.
May I ask Dr. McTavish a question? Because I realize you look at this from a different lens than I do. With the 6 semester rolling average, how does that affect? Because I live in the language of a 6 semester rolling average, but not in the budgeting implications of a 6 semester rolling average.
Right.
As you're thinking about enrollment and as you're thinking about what an increase of students would need, how does the 6 semester rolling average give you flexibility or prevent you from having flexibility in making those adjustments?
Right. The 6 semester rolling average is problematic on a lot of levels, and I'm assuming that it will be fixed as we move forward with CTE.
I think that's one of our shared, very shared.
Right. For us in
Could you
particular,
pause
though,
on the 6 semester rolling average?
Yeah,
so we can
let's
estimate
let
it?
Miss or
Okay.
Dr. McCavish.
and also the next one that falls off for us is our COVID average, which has been a problem for our overall average for a long time. So we have a unique opportunity here where a big influx in one of those numbers and losing bad numbers from COVID actually might make a big difference with our tuition rate.
Thank you.
Now, that's what
Yeah. Just want to make sure. Did you get your answer
I did.
to your question?
Thank you.
What rolling average of what?
So CTE in Vermont, and I'm going to qualify the fact that I am not the person. There are others at the agency who are finance experts who deal with this at a different level than I do. But currently, we fund for technical education in Vermont based on a 6 semester rolling average. So
Is there somebody assigned to the finance of CTEs?
yes,
yeah,
In what regard? What's your real question?
Well, so you're saying you're the CTE person,
I'm the state director of CTE, but I'm
but
not
you
the-
have a finance person.
so let me ask you, what are your goals for this amendment? And then we can help you understand if this amendment will be achieving your goals.
I don't think I'm asking to gotcha question.
Well,
I'm just
no,
trying to understand.
Hang on, guys. Let's roll back to
Right.
this. Let's finish the explanation for the
Let me
6
try to
semester
explain
rolling
it.
average. So
Six semester
everybody.
rolling average.
Is it a complicated finance question?
It's a complicated finance question in implementation. It's not complicated in I can explain it, I think, in a
Okay.
way that will help.
Okay.
What it then looks like in terms of how it all plays out. So basically, the 6 semester rolling average, as I understand it, was developed at some point in time so that there weren't to offset fluctuations in enrollment. So
Is this only CTE?
this is only CT. So as Ascending High School is preparing its budget, it has the enrollment over 6 semesters to look at in budgeting. And if they have an increase of a few students in a year, it balances it out.
So
And it provides more, it was designed to provide more stability.
average number of students.
Average number of students. So 6 semester average of the full-time equivalent number of students. And just to further explain that, you can have a student, for example, who attends a full-time CTE program, a half-time CTE program, an introductory course that's shorter in length. So it's all prorated based on the amount of time a student's actually in a CTE program study. And that 6 semester rolling average has been how we fund CTE in Vermont for a long time. And one of the things you'll see as you delve more deeply into the 2 reports, the first one that APA Consulting did when they were selected by the Joint Fiscal Office to submit a report in 2023, and then the report they submitted in 2025, just in February. Those 2 say that the 6 semester rolling average is complicated and not as transparent as it might have been intended to be, and that a different funding model ultimately would address many of these concerns that you're rightly concerned with in thinking about how to strengthen access to career technical education and provide stability in funding, both to ensure that, I'm going to say honestly, my perspective is the centers that are really down there in the 13 and 14 to $50,000 are running without being able to provide what every student needs. And then we have other systems that, so we're not providing equity of what each CTE center can provide to students in our current 6 semester rolling average way we set budgets either. So we have many things in our funding system that are flawed. And that's why the work was done to help us design something moving forward that would be a much more equitable and holistic approach that also would make it easier for students to do exactly what this amendment intends, which is to have flexibility in attending CTE in the right location based on a wide variety of factors.
Ruth, could you expand on the process by which the tuition rates are set by different tech centers? How we get to this level of variability?
I don't know if I'm the best person to do that. And Dr. McTavish, please help me because you do it in practice. But
So would you like to shift the question? back?
why don't we shift to Dr. McTavish and then I can follow up with anything that might be helpful.
Okay. So again, Nicole McTavish from the Hannaford Regional Technical School District. So each year we determine what the costs of the center are going to be. Those costs are fairly fixed. It's our staff and our equipment refresh and memberships and health benefits for staff. 80% of our budget is health benefits and salary. 16% of our budget is bond debt, and then the rest is operational monies to run the district. So once we set that amount, then we figure out what we believe our enrollment's going to be, and we divide our cost by our enrollment. That sets the tuition rate. So it's a per student rate that we then take to our voters, and our voters vote it up or vote it down. And we've been very fortunate that the community of Addison County has continued to support our budget and our bonds when we've asked.
Okay.
So my point in sharing that is that it is part of our locally derived budgeting process that is resulting in great variability in terms of the per pupil spending across tech centers. And so I think what you're asking is how do we help to address that gap? And I think we need to point to this is a broader equity issue around how we're going to fund the system to ensure that all programs that students are accessing are appropriately resourced and funded.
Very good. Hang on. So Senator Williams, Senator Machine, and then we'll come back to make sure that the question that you asked, Madam Secretary, was actually.
Can I ask a question about the equation?
No, let's,
I want to add some context.
Okay.
let's let Senator Williams.
First thing is, you could point right at me for this, I caused this. 'Cause I took a trip to Hanford with Senator Hardy, and we looked at the program. And my understanding of this whole transformation process was it's kind of going to be CTE was going to be wrapped in it. And And what I'm seeing is a lot of disparity between programs. I know there are seats that can't get filled in some districts. They've got vacancies. It just makes sense to me. I didn't mean to cause any harm. What I'm seeing is it's, maybe out of ignorance, on my part, that we, asked that we came up with the amendment when it's already in statute. And
The best of intentions.
Yep.
Absolutely. And I think it highlights where statute gets us so far. And systemic change is probably what we need to get us to the next step. But absolutely the best of intentions.
Yeah, and we do need to modernize,
Yeah.
our funding for CTE.
Yeah.
I think everyone shares that intent. That was our hope when we came at the beginning of the legislative
I know that's
session.
what the governor's.
And that's a
For sure.
very key priority, that we've contemplated as part of the original proposal.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Quick, just wanted to confirm what I heard. Did you say it was 80% of the cost goes to benefits for employees and then 16% is for salaries?
No, 80% is for salaries and benefits, so the cost of employees.
Got it.
Right.
And the remaining 20%?
So the 80% for salaries and benefits, about 16% is covering all of our bond debt, and then the rest is operational. Right?
Thank you.
Good.
Yep. Just wanted to.
1 second. So, Madam Secretary, you would ask a question about the question being asked. I want to make sure that you got, we were able to respond to it, and then we'll come back to Senator Rollins.
I just wanted to make sure that we were directly responding to your areas of inquiry. You were bringing in broader context to identify some of the systemic issues that we agree we need to address. But I wanted to make sure that we were really clear on what you're hoping to achieve with this amendment in the short term, so that we can make sure our feedback is directly addressed to that.
Could I just add one thing?
Yeah.
Senator, I think this highlights you are absolutely trying to fix the right problem.
Yeah.
And our system means that when we fix it in one place, we break it somewhere else. And so I haven't yet figured out, like, without the more holistic change that we're talking about, it will do good things for 2 or 3 centers and it will cause problems for 2 or 3 others. And so my day-to-day works is too much of my time and my team's time is spent handling those differences in how our current system doesn't work consistently well because in addition to having 17 CTE centers, we have 4 different governance models and 2 different funding models. And when we put all that together, everything we design then has a ripple effect that we haven't intended. So that's intention.
I may have angered some people in my district, but if it's a greater hole gets fixed.
I think you've shined a light on the big hole that we need to fix.
Absolutely.
And that's a gift.
And it gets us to the core. Equity of opportunity for students is what we're looking to achieve, and this shining a light that we have some challenges systemically in Vermont that we that's
Good conversation. Senator Rollins.
I have a few questions.
Good.
Okay.
We start with number 1.
Number one, this equation, when you divide by enrollment over your fixed costs, is that the enrollment with the 6 semester rolling average? Correct. And you're aware of that as
Yeah.
well.
And what I'm gonna ask one follow-up question to Dr. McTavish, because it may help us both
Great.
understand.
Okay.
But
You all not talk.
we do talk,
Okay.
but I live in this in a different, Nicole and I talk regularly, but not about money.
Right.
We talk about federal
Talk to
money.
her about money.
My business manager, and we talked to Marcus.
Markets, it's data.
Oh, data.
You would talk to our
So-
folks.
Yeah, so we have a team that coordinates with business managers. We're looking at finance questions. We have programmatic expertise. And the point of the transformation, right, is to do that connected.
Did you have a sprint team on CTE
We did.
finance?
Yeah.
Where are they?
What do you mean, where are
Did they have a product that we received?
Yes. So the great thing about CTE, and we have all of this documented, is this work has been done in a very robust way over the last 2 years. That's including input from the field. And so the sprint team was providing input on the policy recommendations that were designed to address the systemic challenges that have come through the study. Yes. So we have them.
So you have a answer about if the rolling average, is that a
Well-
requirement in statute?
Yes, which we would then be looking to change, but currently the 6 semester rolling average is how all of our CTE funding works for all of the 15 CTE centers that are public schools. We have 2 private independent schools that provide CTE in a public context, St. John's Gray Academy and Linden Institute, and the funding, the tuition mechanism looks, they don't have a 6-semester rolling average. They have a percentage of their announced tuition based on the amount of time a student is in a CTE program in their building. So it looks different in different ways. But
if they're a full-time CTE student, what does that amount equate to? It doesn't use a rolling average.
it doesn't, it would be just based on their
Their announced
actual,
tuition.
their announced tuition. So the 6-semester rolling average that is what's currently the process for our,
Can we pause on that?
yes.
How do they get you an announced tuition? Do you look at data about their fixed cost divided by their enrollment in a year? Or
That would be our school finance folks who do that, yes.
Okay, but do you feel like it's equal in any way?
So what I think might be helpful is directing you to the study and their appendix B, and you have this linked in your testimony, is where we're doing the financial analysis, and you can see that broken out by center, including the total funding and with and without federal dollars. So I think that gives you an understanding of how the system currently is funding CTE.
Do you think that there's a big disparity between how the private centers are able to announce their tuition and not use the 6-semester rolling average, especially given the pandemic?
We can talk about the technicality. I think what I have focused on and what you talk about the mechanics of calculating the enrollment is we do see that there's a great difference in terms of what we're spending, even for the same program in different centers in the state.
Okay.
And when we compare that and then analyze it related to quality, we're not necessarily seeing that high spending is related to higher quality.
Okay. So
That's the equity conversation as we analyze how to fund this system and ensure it.
I'm also going to say that Dr. McTavish Center has some really nice positions that she's fortunate to be able to have, and some of our lower funded centers don't have those positions. That then, so when we look at the numbers, it's hard to compare because we're not looking at, it looks different. We have 17 different versions of how it looks, and we have 17 different versions of what the adult levels of support are that directly work with students and improve student learning. And we have great differences in that. So that's also where ultimately, as we look more systemically at change, we need to increase access, and we need also to make sure that each of our CTE centers are providing the full range of services that we know contribute to student success.
So on that, I have another question, but on that point, it does sound like the 6-semester rolling average would not only harm centers that saw a drop in students because of the pandemic, but would specifically harm a center that was able to grow in the last 6 semesters.
There is a provision in statute that if a center's enrollment increases by more than a certain percentage, and I'm sorry I didn't bring that specific language with me, but I'm happy to follow up. But then there is a mechanism for an adjustment based on that, but it's a pretty significant increase. So
It's a significant adjustment.
I think I'm not going to state it right without reading the statute.
Okay, so then my last question is I'm just trying to focus on the genesis of the amendment. It sounds like the understanding is that a student or the receiving CTE would have to take responsibility for transportation of those students. It is not the responsibility of the sending.
Right, for
CTE.
outside the region, yes, that responsibility. It's the responsibility of the sending high school district to provide transportation unless the CTE center chooses to provide transportation, and they can choose to provide it. They aren't obligated to provide it. So in this situation, I think that we're discussing now, if Dr. McTavish and her district wanted to provide transportation, they could do so, and they would be reimbursed as a sending district would be if they provided the transportation.
Okay, that's promising.
So that part is solidly already.
Okay, so does this amendment harm anyone? And do you think it actually helps students?
I think I'm going to defer to the senator who said that they've received some of that, so positive feedback from their constituents and their CT center. Because
Well, I
that,
think-
that may it mean that there are other centers that have concerns.
Yes.
If I might,
Yeah.
I think that not everybody's been at the table.
Right.
So we have heard a lot. We've been, Senator Weeks and I and Senator Machine been on this committee for a couple of years now. We've heard testimony from CT. We've never heard anything from Hanford.
Okay.
And, I think it's important that we're all playing on the same level field, for sure. And if there are disparities, I think it should be addressed because it's a missed opportunity. If students want to go the technical route, and they can't.
If we have to weigh some theoretical abstract harm that districts feel versus the benefit that students receive by getting a career technical education that they need to make themselves and their families better off, is that the trade-off that we have right now with this amendment?
I don't think the amendment is addressing any of the specific issues.
It's addressing the very specific issues of students who right now don't have access in their district. That's the point of the amendment, is an immediate concern.
I think my piece to that would be that, I certainly understand Dr. McTavish's starting point and the goal in developing something to resolve this, but I would say that nothing precludes students who are waitlisted at one center to apply to and be accepted by another center and to have that other center find ways to provide the transportation they need.
So is this amendment harmful?
I think the amendment just reinforces systems that are already in place, but doesn't do so in relating directly to those statutory.
How do they work out the tuition difference now?
I don't know that, so the tuition difference, there is not a current way to work that out, but I'm not sure that what's written in the amendment would work that out.
So then maybe we could rewrite the amendment, but we have limited time and I'm really interested in not just putting barriers up as to why we can't solve this problem. This is a problem. From everything you've said, this is a problem.
That's what I'm asking you to clarify. I'm asking you to clarify.
So
what
then
is
let's work on the language then. If you agree this is a problem,
What is this that is a problem?
between the question Senator Heffernan asked about the specific equation of I feel like are we bringing it down to this level? The fixed cost divided by the enrollment, and Senator Heffernan asked, if you were to be able to forecast an increased enrollment, could you bring that number down significantly? We danced around that question, I feel like, for a while. Then we talked about the 6 semester rolling average. And then you said that you could potentially change the figure if the 6 semester rolling average wasn't doing a good job capturing some of these immediate changes. And to me, that would mean there's a way for Agency of Education to be helpful in students getting CTE education right now, and that you're not willing to look at the language with us to do that.
Budgets are locally developed. We are now moving to an approach potentially where we're going to have a foundation formula and we're going to have a weight for CTE. That is going to be able to solve a lot of these issues.
That's in
because
2028.
right now, we do not control the budgeting process at a district or a career technical education center. We are moving to a place where we are going to be more equitable and transparent with the foundation formula to doing that. In the interim, that's why I'm asking, what is your goal in the interim?
My goal in the interim, I feel like I've stated as clearly I can. And what would you propose to solve this problem in the interim?
Can I ask it in a different?
So are you trying to solve
I
a
just-
different per pupil spending amount that is voted on by different communities?
No, I think I've been very clear that it's incredibly obvious that between Stafford and Hannaford, you could bring down the cost of tuition at Hannaford and actually just get the districts to work together. And for some reason, it doesn't seem like AOE wants to take that on at all.
Well, I think she answered the question by saying that it's two different.
They're conflating two different
Senator
things.
Weeks.
These are two districts that are offering programs. Students apply to be part of those programs. They have the opportunity to enroll at different centers currently. So there is part of the work is creating demand within your tech centers and offering the programs that are really aligned to interests of students.
But we're hearing there's a supply problem. You are aware of that, right?
Supply problem with
That there's higher demand
Can I
in
ask you one thing?
Stafford.
We're gonna run out of runway here. You kind of had about half the session, but let me.
I'm just trying to get really simple questions answered.
So what the higher, so the students have the opportunity to enroll in another CTE program. Or currently, is that,
So Senator, if I can, so as prickly as it gets at times, it's good to have this conversation because we're getting something up on the table that we all need to recognize, we need to solve. Okay, so pretty simple question. We understand what the problem is. We understand what the intent of the amendment is. We understand what the legislation currently reads. We understand what the impediments are for doing this, immediately. Is there a mechanism or a possible method that the AOE can adjudicate between Hannaford and Stafford and solve this issue without having to do legislation, or does it need to be more formalized? That's the question.
Let's see.
Please answer it.
If it would help, I mean, the subject is on the table for sure, but if it would help, I would withdraw the amendment just for simplicity,
Okay, good.
because it's already in statute and it did start a conversation for sure that we know.
So hang on, I got a question.
Yeah, let that question get in. Senator's question.
Okay.
Get answered.
I think what might be helpful is explaining the process as a student applies and they're on the wait list. What are the options for that student?
Okay.
So let's be really clear about the current opportunities for students, and then let's make sure we're clear on the problem we're trying to solve.
If a student applies to Stafford and is on the wait list, the student can choose to remain on the wait list at Stafford because I think Jody Emerson's going to testify to you and she's going to tell you that sometimes, and I know this only because she shared before I got here, some of what she was thinking about is sometimes the students on a wait list, we have students, the process is fluid, and so she may find that a student's on the wait list quickly moves into a position while other programs may have wait lists that don't shift as much. But if a student's on a wait list, they have the right to apply to a program in another CTE center that has space available. Transportation has been a barrier. Dr. McTavish is working to provide, as I understand it, transportation to overcome that barrier. There's the one thing that does remain as the concern is if the cost, there's a cost differential between the center in the student service region and the other center. Currently, we've just told high schools as the agency that if the student is eligible for the center to which they ultimately, if they apply to the center and they're accepted and the center that they're accepted to has followed all those right procedures, their sending district is obligated to pay the tuition to the center they attend. So that's where we are currently.
Okay, so, but the issue boils down to the $10,000 difference
Right.
between the two. How can that be adjudicated? Or is there any method, or is it just take it or, accept it, or?
I have
Or-
another question for Dr. McTavish, which is, would you need to have your governance board? What role does your governance board play as you've announced a tuition? Which gets to our
The
complications.
direction we're headed at the state, right, is clarifying what the adequate amount is. We're not there. These are all locally derived budgets. So there is a funding question, but there's also a question around sharing information around students, right? It's the students that are applying. So one district is not allowed to share information on students with another district. That would be violating FERPA. So part of the proposal that we put forward was one district, one CTE district, so that there is that clarity around the different opportunities and being able to more effectively try to place students in programs that are available, and to have a funding system that was equitable and took into account the shared responsibility between the tech center and sending school. So these are all issues that we have identified as problems, and we have proactively put forward a solution to address. And I think what we can do with an existing statute, and I think this is the conversation today, we want to be able to provide additional opportunities for students now. And so I think the real focus is in the transition, right?
Yes.
This is the question. When we have a wait list and there are programs available for the student, how are we making sure that they are availing themselves to those opportunities? I think that's the ultimate question, correct? And so my thought is we just one, what's the process to make sure we're clarifying what's allowable now? I think there's some communication around that to take advantage of.
Yes.
And then there's some questions around the funding, which right now within a locally developed budgeting system, it offers a lot of other questions that are outside of the AOE's control.
Do kids always know that they have that option if the one tech center is, if their home tech center is full? Do they actually always know that they have the option to go to the other one?
I think that would be what I would say we need to make sure we're really clear on. So I think there is a very clear action item of ensuring that that opportunity is clearly communicated. And I think that the tech centers are doing that work among themselves as well. And that there's a lot of value there. So there's some communication and additional focus on the placement that could support with taking full advantage of the existing statute to avail themselves to these opportunities.
What I can add to that too is that, again, with 17 CTE centers, we currently have different application and admissions processes and selection processes than from center to center. What we did do this year, the agency did convene a working group made up of all of the CTE centers, where we began to really look at the commonalities and the differences and really create a facilitated working session. We've had 2 full day sessions. The work needs to continue, but it's identified the points of commonality and the points where we're most far apart to start looking at what can we bring to the process so that we don't have such discrepancies from system to system to make the system easier for families to navigate, and what shared communication and language can we provide to explain to students who are waitlisted what their opportunities are outside of that. The ability of a CTE center to provide transportation to students outside their region varies tremendously based on resources as well. So that does complicate the issue, because as we're looking at this, each CTE center can say, if you're waitlisted here and you want to look at other opportunities, here are other centers that have the program you're interested in. But not all, some of those other opportunities may come with transportation opportunities and some may not.
And I think part of the bigger conversation is really looking at where there is demand and how that's aligned to available jobs in key industries in Vermont, and making sure that we're offering those programs across the state in ways that are accessible. So being able to incentivize the opportunities to, if those programs aren't developed, that they are replicated in key areas of the state where there's a gap, or they're strengthened and the opportunity to expand. So there's also a programmatic review here that is important to evaluating enrollment in programs, alignment with demand of industry, and being very intentional about ensuring that there is access within your local CTE. So that's part of our future planning as well.
Dr. Mess up your last name, but Doctor, you kind of shook your head when she said on the child's information.
FERPA.
Yeah, FERPA. It kind of saw like that's not my.
Yeah, directory information is not protected by FERPA, neither by the federal government nor by state of Vermont. What I think the concern would be is if a center was sharing, I don't know, special education status or demographic or information about how much the parents make or special education IEPs, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about addresses and names.
What I'm going to add to that though is the directory information rests with the LEA, so the local education agency. When a student applies to a CTE center, the CTE center, if they don't accept them, they don't have the directory information. They don't have the right. The CTE center that doesn't accept the student or waitlist the student, they're not enrolled at that center, so it's not their directory information. The directory information would have to come from a sending district.
Can we clarify too the obligation of the sending district to pay if there's a different tuition rate?
If the student is in 11th or 12th grade, is not able to attend the program for one of the reasons set forth in statute or state board rule, then if the student can't attend the program in their designated CTE center, applies to is accepted by a CTE center outside of their region, their sending district must pay the tuition of the school to which they are accepted.
So the sending district will pay the tuition rate that's set by a CTE center outside of their district.
Yes.
So, yeah, so I think we know that a student, I think just to make sure we're clear on 2 points, a student, if they're on a wait list, is able to apply for a program at another tech center, and that the district is obligated to pay the rate of that tech center. Currently.
Currently, that's the current stats.
So I'm not quite clear on what the barrier is. If that is already required. Yeah.
So I'm not sure if you look at memos like these or review them in your purview. This is a Vermont Career Technical Education Bulletin. It looks like it's in the voice of Stafford Technical Center, but the header is the CTE header.
Can you show
And
me what website you're on?
this is an email that I received, and it says, check out these options. Do you know what?
So I do something similar to that,
Okay.
from my center. So that's
Name.
basically Jody Emerson, Central Vermont Career Center. That's basically a way that we can share with students and families what options they have across, if they, in our district, but also outside the CTE.
Right.
So she took my example and just made it Stafford language.
Okay.
So I share a bunch of CTEs so that people who either get denied, waitlisted, or are looking for a program we don't have, they know
Mhm.
where they can look and what the barriers might be. And she called me and asked, how are you working on what you're doing with Randolph Tech? And can I get some information about that? And then she took that and made her own version of it.
Do you know if it was modified in the transportation section?
I can look at it. I don't think it was. but I can
Okay.
look at it.
I'll try to forward it to Will and to Jody. But I was with this memo as it said, you may apply to another tech center after determining that the program of interest is not offered at your local center if you've been denied access to the program due to over enrollment. What's the catch? Well, transportation. Although the programming will be paid for, you need to find your own way to programs outside of the Stafford Technical Center region. If you do have a method of transportation, it's a great idea to check out all of your options. That's an equity issue.
It is an
Right.
equity issue, and that's one of the things that they're trying to address with the transformation idea is getting that one CTE district and bringing transportation in.
But doesn't that contradict
No,
what we
that is the rule right now. You can apply elsewhere, but you can't, there's no transportation provided.
But there's a reimbursement for
Right.
transportation.
Yes.
That's what we just heard.
So,
Yep.
so the piece.
So
there-
could a student drive themselves there and get reimbursed?
No,
It's a district that would be reimbursed.
but what
The receiving district?
the district that provides the transportation. So what I think, what you're reading is accurate. What it may not reflect is a CTE center's willingness to provide transportation to a student outside the district if they have the resources to do so, which not all of our CTE
So in
centers.
other words, statute allows them to do that. And it sounds like because of budget constraints that it's not being offered.
Well, I don't want us to get misinformation out during this hearing. So I do want to be clear that this is a memo from Stafford Technical Center saying you need to find your own way to the program. That makes it really hard for a student to know that Hannaford is offering that transportation. Why wouldn't AOE be there to help solve the problem for that student?
Well, that's a kind of it's a new disclosure that, I think we've heard maybe 4 times already this afternoon, exactly those guidelines. Now, how that trickles down to the student, well, that website sounds like it's at least offering the appropriate information. They can't change it unilaterally.
And I will say that Central Vermont Career Center and Randolph Technical Career Center explored something similar. And then the agency did have a role to play because we were invited to be in their conversation about what that messaging would be and what each could bring to the table. I did not know this conversation was happening in advance of today. We might have been able to have a different conversation, but I also understand that everybody's busy and we're all trying to do what's right for students. And sometimes those things, we provide technical assistance when we're requested to, we don't always know what the issues are that are playing out at the local level until they rise to another level.
So I think
If I could,
given
it's such
that
a-
this
just
is.
hang on. Which two centers?
Central Vermont Career Center and Randolph.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
I just think part of our work is making sure that we're clear and working with the field and identifying what potential barriers are and providing that technical assistance. And so I think my question for Ruth is, knowing that this is a concern, do we feel like we have within statute the ability to address this and the agency to provide technical
I think
assistance
so.
to bridge the gap?
I think so. I think we will want to have a conversation at the CTE leader level about which centers do and do not have capacity to offer transportation, because otherwise we're relying on the fact that no one is obligated to provide that transportation in ways where we may not have a system that fully understands what other members of the system have, because we aren't a holistic system. So each is following the law as written. There may be applications to what opportunities are there that go beyond what's written.
There's a difference between what's allowable and what's required.
Exactly. Allowable versus required.
And so part of the conversation we had at the beginning of this session was calling out that transportation is an equity issue, not just for CTE, but in the K-12 space, which is why we were estimating additional costs for transportation with the idea of making those broader policy decisions related to equity.
Yes, certainly.
So how many FTE do you have in AOE for CT? Just one?
No.
We have three we have three current FTs we're adding for.
Okay,
Had a conversation just about where we are in that process now. And when we are fortunate to have half of the time of one of our BMAT colleagues who does all our CT data. And he does in half time what most people I'm gonna have to do.
Good.
So
And part of the study did make recommendations around expanding capacity at the AOE.
thank you.
Yes.
How would one CTE district solve this problem?
I think you gave the example, a concrete example with Randolph.
right.
And
As I envision it, and we may not have time today, and I'd welcome the opportunity to talk more, and I think APA consulting's reports do help us envision that. But one CTE district would mean you'd have one superintendent for CTE with appropriate other staffing, and they could design a system that would say, how do we make sure that we're looking holistically at our applicants to say, how do we make sure that we design application, admissions, and transportation options that mean we look at all the qualified students who enroll and we prioritize how we make sure we get them into the seats available. Instead of right now, each center having a different process and then multiple people in each center having to collaborate with people in other centers to negotiate how that might work.
so I think the center's question might be different, not the
Okay,
future
sorry.
state, but how would we support with technical assistance of addressing concern?
Oh, I think Ruth answered
Okay,
my question
Okay.
about, I think that still has pros and cons to go to one
We
superintendent in one
have
district.
some.
That
things-
doesn't seem fully baked enough for the proposal we were looking at this year. So I guess my final question is, are you committing to helping make sure kids know their full range of options and that they will get transportation from a receiving center that would like to provide that transportation? Can you help solve this problem?
I think-
Otherwise, I would pass the amendment.
I think we have ways to make sure that we are better able, and this will help us continue the work we started this year to make sure that everyone has model language that would be the same, that could be used in communicating. And we can also be a repository to identifying who can provide transportation and who cannot, so that we could develop a shared statement for the whole CT system.
Yes.
The only
We could also.
concern of this is that, say you only get one child that wants to
Then you don't have
go
transportation.
40, 50 miles away, whereas if you had 20 to who knows how many, then it's efficient. And that's the struggle I think we've been having in education right along. It's trying to get equality and equity and keeping it at an affordable price.
Right.
As much as you want that child to have that education, and we have,
But are we stymieing tens of kids right now when AOE could commit to solve the problem if we don't do this amendment?
that's a hard question because you have two different CTE areas that we've already, their tuition's one, there's another, yes, the school has to pick it up. And Now you may have Rutland going, we don't want to pay that, we can't afford it.
So one final question, we need to move on to the other witnesses, but does this amendment in any way change current law, session law, it's only session law for one thing, but does it do anything that helps clarify beyond what is in current statute?
I don't think it solves the one thing that you most probably, the barrier, the transportation and it solves transportation. We don't need a system that solves transportation because if a CT center can provide it, we're good. It doesn't give us resources to provide to a CT center or a school district of any kind who can't already provide transportation. That's a bigger systems change. It also doesn't help us look at the cost disparity between different tuition levels at each of our CTE centers in ways that if we were to look at a mechanism to change that, how do we ensure that it doesn't have adverse that if it works well for one of our models, it works equally well for one of our others, because our lessons learned over time have been that because we are so complex and have so many different models, we create a solution for one and create a problem for another without ever having that was our intention.
One more. We got
Okay, I might propose this at a later time. We are looking at, all kinds of pieces of the bill in different places, but have you explored just averaging the two districts CTE tuition and saying that's what's gonna get paid?
That's not in our purview to do. That's not the Agency of Education's role. However, we have
So
evaluated.
but I'm saying we could write that in an amendment. Would you have a problem with that as an amendment? Because the system you're talking about actually sounds way overcomplicated. And this, in the next 4 years, until whatever the future state looks like, seems to be a pretty reasonable way to say, to be fair, some places it's more or less, they might go 2 counties away, but we're gonna average the tuition. We need to solve this problem in the next few years.
I'm just gonna say my concern would be that if that were to be the case, that we would be inundated by the high schools that are required to pay the full tuition, saying that if there are some high schools that are paying a reduced rate, that reduced rate should apply to them.
But I don't think that makes any sense from my proposal, but I know you all don't live in statute.
Well,
So
That's not fair.
Yeah.
We have been studying the CTE challenge for 2 years. We put forward a comprehensive proposal that clearly enumerated the challenge and the barriers and proactively put forward solutions to strengthen our CTE system. We did that also acknowledging that we need to create early exposure in middle school, and we funded that. And so
you funded it.
in the proposal we put forward, we clearly identified objectives. We have said from the beginning, when you're doing this work.
That's also in 4 years, though.
You need.
I'm
to
asking about the
identify-
next few years.
I think what I think is, you've made an earlier statement that the proposal put forward was not fully baked, and that's an inaccurate statement. There's 2 years of extensive studies that this General Assembly commissioned, and we have been involved within the agency of continuing to shepherd to its conclusion, to make recommendations to solve these challenges that are inherent in our current CTE system. And we were clear in articulating our objectives. So we want to make sure one of the barriers is early exposure and access. And a challenge currently is that we're not funding that in middle school. So we put that forward as a proposal. We also wanted to bring in additional resources in 9th and 10th grade to support that exploration so that those students, by the time they're eligible for CTE, have the opportunity to fully explore if this was interest for them, and then looked at the actual funding and realized that there were equity challenges. And there was also a competition for resources, which was preventing many students from accessing these programs. And so we put forward a proposal to address that considered governance, quality, and funding. So pushing back on the assertion that that was not fully baked. The question
This is about 25, 26.
The question that you're asking is around the transition period and identifying an opportunity to average tuition rates, I think is what you're looking at. what we're suggesting is that in the current context, we're not seeing that as a barrier, given that there's obligations to pay the tuition funding in full. And it's a very smaller portion of the population that you're addressing. If that is the prerogative, that's certainly something that the General Assembly would pursue. What we're calling out is we're saying that that's not fully addressing the challenges, because the challenges are more systemic. And one change to the system does have a lot of unintended consequences that I think we would need to evaluate.
Okay, can you stay? Sorry, okay.
We'll move.
Move
We'll
the next set. I don't know which one of you is next. All come together.
Nothing personal.
So.
Hi, my name is Nicole McTavish. I'm the superintendent and director at Patricia A. Hannaford Regional Technical School District, also known as the Hannaford Career Center. So I'm coming to you today to, I think, expand upon and hopefully support the amendment put forward to really make sure that all students have access to CTE wherever there is a space available for them, essentially. I have the opportunity to talk to you. I think this is the first time I've been here, although I've watched you so much on the YouTube. I think I feel like I've been here, but I wanted to kind of give you my background because I come to Vermont from a kind of an eclectic background, which might help you understand why I'm so passionate about kids having access to CTE. So I've been an educational leader for over 25 years in 4 states and in 3 countries. We've lived overseas as an active duty military family, and moving every 18 months to 3 years over that time gave me the opportunity to serve in a lot of different educational systems. So I've served in public education for most of my career. I've also served in charter schools, in private schools, in nonprofits, and in overseas military environments. So I have that educational aspect of seeing kids thrive in all kinds of different systems. I've also served in all kinds of sizes and shapes and demographics of districts. I've served in districts as small as 200 kids and as large as 26,000 kids. I've served in urban, suburban, and rural districts, and very poor districts all the way to very well-off districts. So I've kind of seen education from all the different places. I had the good fortune to show up in Vermont in order to lead on CTE, which is for sure my favorite part of public education. I see kids thrive in CTE every day, and kids' lives turned around by the opportunities that they get in CTE. So I come to this process with this at heart. Patricia Hannaford district has currently, we serve 347 students. And in our small county, Madison County, that's 1 in 3 high school students. So we serve about 32% of all the high school students resident in Addison County. And for us, we have access. Our resident high school students are just under 1,200 students in the district, which is a pretty small catchment area compared to Rutland, who has 2,100 resident high school students. And just for context, Essex and Burlington Tech, which have resident students of about 7,000. So we are actually not the smallest catchment area either. I mean, the catchment area is very so much across the state, which is part of the barrier that you're all describing today, right? Just the differences there. And when you have a smaller catchment area with fixed costs, then the tuition is higher. Plus we have, as you've heard, we have bond debt. So we were lucky enough to have our community support us with 2 different bonds over the last 15 years. One to build our North Campus, which is our diesel program, our auto program, and our Deep Roots Farm or agriculture program. And then a second bond, which totally remodeled and renovated our main campus, which has all of the rest of our 24 programs. So we sit in a place where we have a fully modernized building over 2 campuses with 21 programs, but we don't have the enrollment in our catchment area that build out the programs. And we have had the concern and worry for a while that we're looking at many of our contiguous CTEs that have too many kids. Their catchment area is too big. Many kids want those programs and they're not able to access them because they're full. They're fantastic programs and they're full. because of that. And so our hope and opportunity is to provide a way for students who want access to CTE to have that access to CTE. So from, just from the very beginning, CTE is described in Vermont as an entitlement, right? Public education is an entitlement, and so is CTE. Students are entitled to enroll. If they're a resident, they're in 11th grade, they don't yet have a high school diploma, they apply, they meet the admissions criteria, and they're accepted. So they should be able to attend CTE. The intent then clearly from all of the language is that students have access and that it's widely available. We also have far greater access in some places because there is space than other places because they are full. It's an issue of simply where a student lives, if they have access to CTE or not in many cases. And we have the service regions. Currently, our CTEs are all bound by a service region. Ours is loosely Addison County, but 4 of our towns actually in Addison County are in a different boundary area, but that's similar across the state. And we're all bound to those, and we serve the students in those catchment areas unless we're full or we don't have a program. And we regularly send students to other areas, like we send a lot of students to Stafford because they have cosmetology and we don't, and they send some students to us for diesel because we have diesel and they don't. So that's a regular occurrence.
Let's get back and forth right now.
Right now, they have to drive themselves.
Okay.
Right.
Does that open any liability concerns for the school with that, but the parent guardian sign off on it is fine?
We have, I'm sure it's probably similar every place, but we meet with the parent and the child and say, you're going to have to drive, and we make sure that that's okay with the parent. We don't have them sign a document though, no. But they do, as part of their admissions process, have that meeting with us because that is something you have to think about as a parent, right?
Is the rule that you send the lower of the 2 tuition amounts, or do you send the 30-something thousand?
Correct. The current way it works is that no matter where a student comes from, their resident town pays that. The resident district where the student should have been pays that. So we also have some just weird ones where a student is actually choiced into a different school, but that school is not the one paying their tuition. It's wherever they actually were supposed to go. So it's a little bit strange, and it causes some spirited debate.
And Ruth, you were aware of that.
That's a systemic issue. that
Okay.
As we had school consolidation and the state board rule assigns each town and each high school to a CTE center, we've had some changes, which mean that now there's students, for example, Chelsea no longer has a high school. Students have choice. That plays out in quirky ways in how our tuition systems work.
Right.
And we navigate those
Right.
in a variety of ways.
Lots of phone calls to figure out who's paying for whom and why. Right.
Okay, so
Okay. So this is important to us because in the state of Vermont, I think that only about 50% of our students go on past their high school experience to post-secondary education or training. So we're looking at about 50% of our students who we very much want to make sure that they have a high wage, high demand, high skill job, so that ultimately we hope that they can live and thrive, raise families, and settle here in Vermont. We also have, when we're looking at a housing shortage and we're looking at wages that aren't necessarily keeping up with our neighboring states, we're not going to be importing our skilled tradespeople anytime soon. The CTEs are really the crux of moving Vermont forward in the trades and making sure that the droves of people that are retiring right now have young people coming up to take on those trades. Because by 2030, 1 in 3 Vermonters will be over 60. So we're also operating at an employment rate of less than 3% right now in the state. And that means that every student that's graduating, all of our communities are really depending on them to step into these trades so that we have the services that we need and that students can have a really good life and be able to afford a family and a house here in Vermont. And we need realistic pathways for students to do that. So CTE is good for students, it's really good for communities, and it's really good for the economic development of Vermont in the future. So right now, we want to ensure that more students in our region have access to CTE sooner than waiting for whatever the transformation is that comes and at whatever time that comes. There's a gap of at least 1 up to 4 years between now and then that hundreds of students are not being able to access CTE across the state. And especially when we have spaces for them, we're trying to figure out a way to do that. So some concerns that might be raised about this amendment is that it's already allowable. I mean, we've heard a lot of talk about that it's already allowable right now. My question to that is, if it's already allowable in the Hannaford Career Center, we know that centers to our north and our south have testified that many of their programs are full because they are great programs and kids want to take them. And we have many spots in those in the programs at the Hannaford Center. Yet only one student, we only have one student that has come to us from being denied from another program. So if it's allowed in current statute and current law, but it's not happening, then there's clearly a barrier to it happening. And how do we make sure that students have a clearer and easier pathway to get to a CTE program that they want? It also happens that the one student that we do have is related to a teacher at our center. So they got that information through their family, right? That I'm not sure that the students understand across the state that they have access to all the other CTE centers. So we're hoping that this amendment would clarify the process, really push the point that students can and should be exploring the CTE centers, at least the ones that are contiguous to their own boundary area, so that they can have the access to the programs that they want. Another question that has come up is that the wait lists are really flexible, or they might change over time. That may be so at some of the centers, but we don't find that. Part of it is that in order to apply for a CTE center, a student actually, it's an application process. It's actually a pretty rigorous process. The student writes a written application. There are transcripts and attendance records. If the student has an IEP, is a special education student, their family has to have an IEP meeting before they apply and after, if they are accepted. They have to often write something to support their application, and in many cases, they have to go through an interview process. We find that students who have made it through that process are very unlikely then to not show up. So we find that the process is rigorous, which is a question for another time, but we don't find a lot of movement on our wait lists. The other question is, there's some question about if a student is denied entry into one center, should they have access to another center? A concern about either shopping around for programs, or that something that might cause them to be denied from one center should perhaps bar them from being accepted to another center. And I think that's problematic on a lot of levels. First, we don't all have the same admissions requirements. Centers that have really long waiting lists are probably able to have more stringent requirements than programs that have much space. And I also think that some of us use the interview process in a different way. We use an interview process for our students to very much advocate for themselves if they wouldn't otherwise have been accepted. And often they advocate really well and are subsequently accepted. So I wouldn't want a decision that I made, for example, to bar a student from going to another center. I think that each application to each center is discrete and the child has their own chance there. For example, if I was denied employment by somebody, or if I didn't get into a college, I would certainly hope that that wouldn't keep me from getting another job or going to a different college. Transportation is another issue that's come up, and we believe that we have found a path forward to provide students transportation in the Hannaford Center. We have vans available and we have some short buses available. And we believe that if we got even a small handful of students that were coming from a specific sending district or specific sending regions, we'd be able to provide transportation through reimbursements allowed. We're very much hoping to use that as a test case to see if we can make it work. And if it worked on scale, then we feel really strongly that might be able to cause our tuition to decrease over time. And then the other question was about FERPA. So FERPA is, again, I think we addressed this a little bit, but directory information is not a violation of FERPA. Since schools are able to provide directory information, you might, if you've ever had a high school student in your life and they start getting piles of email and piles of letters and applications for the military and colleges and everything under the sun when they're a senior, they get that information through directory information requests. So we can share directory information. So the bottom line for us is that the Hannaford Center sits in a really wonderful place where our community has supported us to remodel this building and to build a second campus. However, the catchment area of students doesn't support the size of the building that we have, but we have fantastic programs who are maintaining enough enrollment to keep going. We would love to be able to offer the opportunities to students who are otherwise denied. We have no interest in causing students who are on track to be accepted into their service region. They should go to their service region. It's easier, it's cleaner, it makes scheduling easier, transportation is easier, everything is easier. Our concern is that there are many students, hundreds of students being turned away from CTE in the state of Vermont. We're trying to make a pathway for students who otherwise wouldn't be served to be able to be served for CTE.
So can I ask that one question? What does this amendment, how does this amendment change from where we are right now? Anything from where we are right now?
I think there's a good question. There are two pieces to that. One is it puts a spotlight on and helps us to articulate and share the news that students should be asking, and parents have the entitlement that their students are going to a public education CTE and that they should be allowed to do that, encouraged to do that, and supported to do that. I think the other piece for us is there's a really big difference with a student getting a personal phone call or getting a personal letter or having a teacher in a program that we know they're interested in call them, rather than a form letter saying, here are a number of opportunities you might have. Our center's intent is to call students who we know who are not otherwise able to be served, and personally invite them to a tour and a meeting and show them what we have to offer to see if they want to come. We have to date been unsuccessful in obtaining that directory information, and we're hoping that this will help us do so.
So that's different than current law.
I don't think it's different, but there's not a mechanism for me to access.
That's correct.
Yep.
Will you interview
Consideration.
the students? That if this goes through, will they have to go through the interview process, just like you were explaining?
So we don't, in our application process, we don't interview every student. We interview a student if they might not otherwise have been accepted just based on their paperwork. And generally the student, honestly, usually they're accompanied by a counselor or maybe their parent. They often are very animated and excited and advocate for themselves very well. So we use it as sort of a deal breaker, and it almost always works in the student's favor.
Okay, so most of the time it's just an application
Most of the time.
they fill out. And
Right.
all right. Cool. Thanks. Thank you.
Senator Hershey.
So I think this is just kind of a comment to your question, but I think that there is something that has changed here. It took me a minute to figure it out, but so if we're looking at the memo from AOE, top page 3, where it says, as currently written, it does not appear the State Board of Education Rule 2393 provides the mechanism to reconcile differences in tuition charged by the CTE Center, the spending district's designated regions, tuition of the CTE Center outside the designated region. But the change that I think is substantive is on line 17 of the amendment, which is pursuant to an agreement between the sending district and the receiving district that specifies how costs for such enrollment should be covered. So is this almost like a CTE BOCES model where you have one CTE saying to another, hey, we'll send you 10 students. And if we send you 10 students, can you match this tuition? And then if necessary, and then they can go to the tuition reconciliation if it's necessary. Or if they're not able to get to that certain tuition number that they're hoping for. Or do I have no idea what I'm talking?
So I don't know the exact answer, but when I spoke with Senator Harvey, she said that she had run all of this through and that this was all currently allowable, that there wasn't anything listed here which was not currently allowable. I am not an expert on the law in that way.
Well, legislative council has put this together for us.
I don't fully see what the issue is though with the amendment. This has been a very enlightening conversation since we've started, but I'm not fully seeing what the issue is then with the amendment at the moment.
You mean as far as needing it? Or,
No, I think it is needed. I do think it makes a small change. But I think having ledge counsel in would be helpful.
Okay. Let's, Senator Weeks.
Oh, sorry, thanks.
so just to be clear, the intent of this whole process, the amendment was to foster cooperation, not competition.
Absolutely.
Right, so. And it certainly stimulated the conversation.
I can't say, this is very surprising. I am shocked at all this attention to it. I do know that, we often give tours, and one of the biggest questions that we get, especially from elected officials, is I'm from X place and they're full and turning kids away. I see that you have space. Why aren't kids coming here? I get that almost every time.
Okay, I think we understand the answer.
Thanks.
You take one chair back.
Sorry, I'm just doing a little research on big word girls.
Helpful. Maybe. Hi, I'm Jody Emerson, Superintendent Director at the Central Vermont Career Center and the President of VACTED, and I am speaking on behalf of VACTED today. Based on just receiving this and sending it out to the directors across the state and pulling together all of their feedback. So, number one, I know that you're doing this because you want to provide access, and thank you. So I think that's been part of the ask for 2+ years now. And I have been here a few times. I'm Nicole behind me. So I understand that you want to do something, and I hear that in this. There are concerns though. So there is the concern that if I am a center that has space and it says may transport, am I now on the hook for transporting? Because my budget for next year and all of our budgets are already fixed, right? And the same is true of our sending schools. So I heard that conversation about the tuition, which is why I was trying to look that up and thinking about sending schools making an estimate of what the cost is for their students to go to CTE, right? And so if now 10 of their students are going to a more expensive or less expensive, that changes the amount that they're going to have to pay. I'm thinking actually in my region, because we've been talking about it already, basically Orange Southwest reached out and said, we have buses, we could provide transportation to your students that are waitlisted or denied. If you share it with them when they get waitlisted or denied this information, maybe we can catch some. I know probably 40+ students from one of my sending schools, U32, is now going to Randolph. Great, right? That's 40 students who wouldn't have had access. It's also 40 students they probably didn't budget for. So there are not budget for Washington Central.
Hey,
Because they were expecting the same number, this 6-semester average of students who are attending CTE to attend CTE. Now they have 40 more than what they normally do.
They have 40 more.
Correct, because now there's more access because students are going to 2 different centers.
You mean 40 more that are taking their dollars and leaving the district?
40 more students who are going to a CTE.
so from the CTE's perspective, that's not a problem because they have.
Correct.
Yeah.
That helps Randolph because they've
Yeah.
just gotten 40 students that they wouldn't have otherwise gotten. But for the regular school district, there is an added cost, and I don't think we've addressed that here. And I think there's that added cost if they were originally going to Rutland and now they're going to Hannaford, there's that added tuition cost. And I don't think the tuition piece that you're talking about in state board rule, it's basically what tells us at the end of the year, because we set our tuition based on this very complicated spreadsheet, which I could share with you. And it has in it the base rate, and we have to figure out the percentage of that. So some of it comes directly from the ed fund, right? And some of it comes from our sending schools. So we have to tuition bill them directly. There's some offsets that we get reimbursements for some of the staffing. So my position as a director is offset a certain percentage. So as the assistant director, the co-op coordinator, the school counseling coordinator. So there's some offsets that we get to figure out, okay, what is our tuition based on our 6-semester average? 6-semester average, it can be a hindrance for sure. And it's going to take 3 years to recoup if we grow, right? To get that back. Where was I going? So anyways, we set that what we think it's going to cost us to run the school, and we set our tuition based on that. And then at the end of the year, the state takes in our actual costs and tells us what we're allowed. That's what that tuition piece does. Tells us how much we were allowed. And sometimes we're not allowed as much as we charged and we have to give money back. And sometimes we're allowed more and we have to bill our Sunday schools more. Super complicated. Not easy. So there were concerns from my peers about the budgetary impact of transportation. If it says may, might we all be on the hook? Or some people are and some people aren't. That's a concern. I don't have buses. I don't have a way to transport people to come to my center. So there's those budgetary impacts. Operational challenges. I know that some of my Sunday schools have had to shut down bus routes at times and have parents bring kids to school because they don't have enough bus drivers. We've struggled with some of our Sunday schools trying to figure out how to merge transportation together to get kids to Central Vermont from Cabot, Twinfield, U32, Montpelier, for example. If we're contracting with private transportation to provide access to students for transportation, there could be background checks that need to happen. It could be an exorbitant cost. I was just paying to transport students from my center to one of my offsite programs. And that cost me $14,000 a year that I don't think was reimbursable, just to get them to a different space across town.
But isn't, just to be clear, isn't what's being proposed, and by way of example, Albert, would be that the CTE running the bus, and they would make that money back by the additional.
Yeah, there's some sort of reimbursement.
So why is that an issue? Because see, the Hannaford, by way of example, would be they'd be the ones making that decision and bearing the expense.
Right, but if I'm having to do it because you said that we may do it and 2 centers decide to do it, the rest of us then have to do it. If there's that feeling that we're all obliged to do it at that point, like what is our requirements if we're trying to meet the needs of students? There's some fear around that.
But it's a fear based on the word may. Wait,
Yes, sure. So
is it a
for
shall or is it
example,
a may?
it's a may. For example, Burlington Tech Center says that they have some students from Lamoille and Randolph attending their aviation program, and they're flexible to make sure that they're able to attend, but they would be required to go all the way to Randolph to transport someone up to Burlington Tech.
But it's not, just to be clear, nothing says that.
Right, but may, and if you have a couple of centers who are and a couple who aren't, there's still more equity concerns around that. There were concerns about students, as Nicole Pavish pointed out, being denied and that maybe there's a reason for the denial. The example was actually a 30+ attendance missing. And so that student may not be successful, may not make it through. So they may not even be someone who ends up in your 6-semester average long-term because they might not show up. Waitlists are dynamic. I can tell you that mine have been this year, particularly around this, the fact that we've been very clear that Randolph is providing transportation. And so that has shifted a lot of people who were denied or waitlisted, applied. They applied in our second round, then they didn't show up in our second round, went straight there. Some of them are choosing now to shift, trying to shift because their friends are going there and they want to be with their friends. It's been a learning opportunity for us. And I think I'd like to see what further we learned from this. And I think that we can maybe share some of what we've done with Hannaford Center to try to help them. Because what I did was reach out to all of our Sunday schools and say, these programs are full. Students who have been denied or waitlist, they can apply to Randolph, and Randolph is giving a bus. So all the counselors across all of those Sunday schools for CBCC knew that they could share that news, and they did. And Randolph is up over 100 students next year because of that. So they've accepted a bunch of students from us. What's been difficult is that FERPA piece of me reaching out to my director at Randolph and saying, okay,
we had some students not even show up, so they weren't denied, they weren't waitlisted. And they might have tried to, we're hearing they're going to you, and they should come through this process of us first. And yet we technically shouldn't be sharing names because it's not my directory information if they're not my student. And so trying to navigate that in a way that protects kids and still gives access, but also make sure that they went through the process has been very difficult. And I've actually reached out. That's what Ruth was referring to. I've reached out with, how do we navigate this when there's students that didn't come to us yet that have already been accepted, we're hearing, and we're not supposed to talk amongst ourselves. So that might be a way to save us, is to figure out, how do we have those conversations, or how do we have those conversations, you support us, to make sure we're not violating FERPA on that, because it's been difficult. It's all for a good reason, giving kids access. We do need a common admissions practice and a communication process. I think that your bill doesn't have that in it. I'm not sure how we would do that, and we're trying to navigate that now. And then there was some question from my peers around private schools and how does that happen if there are students who are in an area attending private school, they're located closer to one center than another, but officially assigned to the other one. How does transportation enrollment happen? I can tell you that my administrative team is a little concerned because all of the students from my region are coming to my center next year in the morning, whether they're our students or Randolph's, and then they're getting on a bus and going to Randolph. And then Randolph will be delivering them back to their home schools at the end of the school day. So I have some oversight of kids who are not mine for who knows what the period of time is. And there's some risks with that.
I didn't know that.
We also need to talk about.
Yeah, thanks for, I'll
Yeah,
start thinking.
so while I think the intent of this bill is access, and I like it, I do agree all of this is possible now, and I think what it needs is better communication between directors, but also between directors and their sending schools and counselors to make sure that students are aware, and to make sure when there is Hannaford providing transportation to be able to share that. There's worries about what the unintended consequences of this bill, the language in this bill might do.
So follow up on this, we heard from the administration, from Secretary's office, that this is something that they've identified. We're well aware that we've worked on
Yes.
the issue in general, and we're aware of the fact that this Secretary's office put forth a proposal to do this over time. And then, but I think what to state the obvious, what the committee is thinking about are kids who need it today.
Yeah.
And what do we do for the next couple of years to make sure that kids who sort of access now actually getting it? It's great that we have a long-term solution coming, and I think, when we do, it's one of the committee has made this its own charge for next year, along with the Secretary's office. We know that part. So are you, and it does seem to me that I'm thinking that maybe a major issue is actually kids and their families actually being aware
Correct.
of the opportunities. And so are you saying that you're going to help take on the issue?
It's certainly going to be a topic. We have a directors meeting this week. So the Vermont Association of Career and Technical Education Directors meets on Thursday. And this is going to be a topic of discussion, I'm sure. And I can share how, and Mika Oaks, who's the Randolph director, we can share what we've done. We can share the difficulties that we've had, but also the successes piece, because I think we're showing it can be done by saying that I have over 32 students going to Randolph next year. It's clearly being done. And so how can we help others to do the same thing? And how can we improve the communication and making sure that students outside of Hannaford's region, for example, know that Hannaford is willing to share and send transportation. And if there are 40 from one school, are you going to be able to do that with the vans and buses that you have? Because I definitely didn't expect that many students moving from our region down to that center.
Just one more question going to Senator Sheen, trying to parse out what the bill actually does or doesn't do anything different or than current law. What's your take on that?
I think that we can do all of this already, except for the tuition piece. You gotta pay, what the law says is that you pay the tuition based on whatever that CTE has set. And when we get our allowable tuition, we give back or take more if it wasn't accurate. So that's what the tuition piece you're referring to is.
Can I ask, did you hear my proposal? And as someone experienced, does it sound reasonable to consider? Wouldn't it be the districts being able to kind of have that conversation even?
This funding formula is so complicated. I don't feel qualified to answer that well right now. Can the districts negotiate that?
It sounds like they negotiated with the independents.
I don't know.
No, it's a set formula, it's a set percentage based on enrollment.
And in my region, it would be the opposite. They actually pay less to go to Randolph than they pay to go to Maine, right?
Let me ask the question differently.
What's the average?
What can we do collectively, all of us, to open this door for kids starting school next August? Different than what we have. If we know, if we're right that there are kids who want this, need this.
Yeah.
Aren't able to, for one reason or another, avail themselves of the opportunity, what can we do to improve things for next year?
Because our budgets are set for next year, ours and every other school, it's hard to do anything that plays with money. I think the communication and making sure that students are aware that in some places there's an opportunity for transportation outside of their region to another CTE is what we can do. And so really figuring out where those are and finding ways to broadcast that across all the sending schools.
You heard the repeating back of the memo to students that, hey, but like transportation's on you. That's the
always
catch.
been true. My
Yeah.
son attended a CTE outside of the district we lived in because I could afford it.
Mhm.
And I've said that at this committee a couple of times over the years.
But you're like empowered to go back to all the CTEs, right?
Yes.
And talk to them. And do you think it would be fair for Stafford to be asked to make their language a little bit more?
That's my language. That's my fault. That's exactly from.
Okay.
But it's accurate. It has been accurate. So now it was accurate. Now we have 2
Yeah.
CTEs that can provide transportation. I don't know that we have any others that can and will.
But couldn't it say something a little, okay. I feel like
We can edit that.
Yeah.
If we can have it on our actual site, which
Okay.
is not,
Yeah.
where it says, check with these other career centers to see if they can provide, but in statute, it says you must provide your own transportation.
It says the district's not responsible for transportation.
Says it may.
Okay. It says, okay.
The district's not responsible.
So I am really hoping that language can be changed. If you could take that back to your group. And I'll just say it's just been really hard to listen to this. I know I sound prickly, but I was a free lunch kid and my father essentially became, professionally unemployed and went to meetings about how we get help. And that's how he learned that if we have a FAFSA expected contribution of 0, then I can take the SATs for free and I can apply to colleges for free.
Yeah.
That is how I went to college. He was well educated, but he didn't have any money. I cannot imagine if you all can't explain what's supposed to happen for these students, how this is fair and how this has been going on this way for so long.
It's been a long time.
And all I hear is like the adults are scared that this might happen and we are friends, so we work this out. I am not hearing enough about kids being denied the ability to get a lifeline into the economy right now.
I think the biggest concern is how do we afford it and who's paying for it? Is it the career center? Is it the sending district that's paying for it, because right now sending districts transport to my center. I don't have any transportation. And how do we navigate that as we shift and ask them to take kids further away, especially in a time when they don't have enough buses in their own district? So yes, we need to figure out how to get kids there so that it's not on their families. How do we do that in a way that is responsive to current state of budgets that have been built? So if there's funding for that transportation and it's available and it's not going to impact anyone's budget, great.
I would say from everything I've heard, and I have been doing education finance for a little while, like we're now, I've been on Ways and Means, I've been on Senate Finance. It would be, I can't see, I keep hearing about the unintended consequences of the really abrupt, we have to send this much and we have to send this much regardless.
Yeah.
Having the flexibility, just the ability to average that out. I cannot see that hurting anyone or anything.
I don't feel like I can answer that question for.
Okay, I'm just gonna say, I think I can answer that question. And I would either pass this amendment as it is or add a piece about averaging the tuition for the next few years until the future state is upon us. But in the meantime, I'm actually really glad we had this conversation today. This is an economic development conversation. This is a transportation conversation. This is an everybody, everything conversation. And it should not be this difficult for students to take advantage of their entitlement to career and technical education.
So under the current system, current rules and laws, 2 districts can make an agreement to send one student to another for CTE, and they can modify tuition.
I'm not aware of modifying tuition at all.
Okay, I mean, I'm just trying to
The
figure out.
agreement, the only agreement that we have is that, yes, they've been denied from us, so they can go to you. Or yes, our program's full, they can go to you.
So I'm getting that sometimes, what I hear from people sometimes is it's actually better if the legislature doesn't do X, Y, and Z. That's kind of the sense that I'm getting with this. But I'm just trying to confirm in my own brain here that whether or not this amendment actually changes anything. So if districts can't modify tuition to say, all right, if we're sending you this many students and you'll be getting this much money, it'll help offset the cost for tuition in general. So let's come to an agreement on this price for, say, 10 students. That's not something that can be done now. But as I'm reading this language, it seems like it's something that could be done in this amendment. And that does seem like a big step after hearing your testimony. And so I guess I'm not sure what my question is. I guess it was just general comments. Yeah, so I'll just let their summary.
Yeah.
So, Secretary Saunderson, let me ask you that same question. What I think we hear the CTE Center, they're going to try to help with clearer language for students and to encourage students to understand what their options are. And with that question about what can we do for kids entering the system this fall to help make sure they have access. Would you have an answer for that question?
We can definitely provide technical assistance to help communicate the messages that have been articulated here. We have ways of doing that and sharing that information. We have ways of making sure we're accurately sharing information so that with recommendations and requests for how that information is then further shared with families.
Senator Williams.
PACTD, are you a member of that?
Yes.
So, that's kind of the common ground we have right now. If we need policy, make it happen.
Have you run into resistance with the proposal that you're making?
Yes.
In, I mean, I don't want to put you too much on the spot, but in what form or in what way have you run into resistance?
So I think everybody, I believe sincerely that everybody is trying to make every opportunity for kids to have CTE experiences. There is a lot of concern around unintended costs, who bears what costs, what may or may not be felt as a need as opposed to what the language actually says. I think there's misunderstanding about sharing student names. It's very important to me if I'm going to reach out to a family who isn't yet associated with our center that I do it personally. In order to do that, I need a name and a phone number or an address or something. That will be more effective, I think, to invite a family than a form letter. I have not been able to obtain that sort of information. And I find it, especially with a family that we've never before spoken to, that if it's not going to be personal, it's probably not going to work. Again, when I know that hundreds of students are being turned away in my general region from CTE because the programs are fantastic and the kids want to take them, I am doing my best to give a spot in a center that's been renovated, costs no money to anybody, and is awaiting more students. And the system has created these tensions, right? The current system we have has created all of the tensions. Jody and Mika at their various centers have shown that this model that we're discussing works. She just talked to about 40 kids that wouldn't have otherwise had CTE that are now getting it. That makes the adults in the system a little crazy because it's hard and it's complicated and it's stressful. And yet these 40 kids got that opportunity. That's what I'm trying to do for our region, is to provide those same opportunities. We have a path we believe forward to provide transportation because we do get the same reimbursement. So if we're able to utilize the fleet that we have and hire, I mean, it doesn't cost that much for me to hire somebody to drive a van or to drive a short bus. I can create opportunities outside of a really complicated system. But if the kids don't know about it and the families don't know about it, they can't avail themselves of that. And when I know that there are hundreds of students who are getting turned away and I have only one that made it to my center, then something is not working in current legislation and current intent. I think everybody's intent is that students have their entitlement to CTE. There's nobody I've met. It's one of the only bipartisan issues, right? Everybody understands the importance of CTE. The key is making sure that kids get to it. Right.
Have you reached out to the sending school counselors in the sending schools? Because I feel like maybe your communication has just been with one individual, potentially in the CTE, and not necessarily
So I
sharing the message of transportation is available more widely.
So I be careful. So when I'm approaching another district that's outside of my family, right, outside, like I feel very obliged to use change of command. I think if I misstep across the superintendent, misstep across the principal, misstep across the director, I feel that is not well received. And so I've been trying to attend to that.
So if there's a way to have that conversation with the director and the two of you to figure out how to share that information more widely, that's what I would recommend. I mean, I've had the same issue before with Randolph, and we had a special meeting for that too.
I was there to help.
And now we're at a point where we can try to communicate about it. And yes, there are tons of logistical things getting in our way right now. And we will navigate them as we can because it's what's best for kids. And I believe that's true of all the directors that you could potentially work with to get kids. So it's the conversation we need to have on Thursday is how do we share the message that there is transportation to this district outside of these 3, 4, whatever CTEs, so that kids who have been denied access have an opportunity.
I don't disagree that there's communication within the ranks. I feel though that this is an important enough discussion, especially at a critical moment in Vermont's history, where we know that something's coming, but it's going to be a while. And we have an economic situation right now where people are retiring from the trades and nobody's replacing them, and we're not bringing people in. And I have 200 open seats in high quality programs where students are getting jobs right after high school that other students that are getting denied are not coming to. I think this is a small win that is a bipartisan effort that you have an opportunity to put forward. And even though it's already codified in the statute, it's not working because students aren't accessing it.
Okay, I think Secretary Saunders, then Senator Heffernan, then Senator Williams.
I think we are all sharing a commitment to expanding current technical education. That's really clear in this conversation. What I think we've heard is that existing statute allows for this, and we're seeing some practices where that's happening well, and that the agency can commit to technical assistance to support that at a larger scale. Now that we know that that's not as consistently applied, and I think having that example with Ruth helping to broker that and facilitate that type of collaboration and seeing the effects of the positive outcomes, we're building on that. And that is a very promising, I think, short-term solution to ensuring that students are fully accessing and taking advantage of these opportunities. I think the barrier that that we continue to have is funding for transportation. And that is something I think we need to continue to look at and evaluate long-term. Equity, it's important for us to talk about what are the barriers to expanding career and technical education. And part of the studies, we have identified transportation and actually outlined roles and responsibilities and cost. So I really think we have a very strong foundation to start on to make some really more transformative policy decisions to address this future, to really get at root cause. So I think that's what we're headed.
Senator Heffernan.
So my concern is what I wish Jody hadn't left, that she was saying that our budget's already set up for 25, 26. So it's definitely something we could set up for 26, 27. But is the consensus, should we wait that long? And if we can't wait that long, what do we do to make it so it can happen? Don't know who that would be directed at. Because I think we're all in agreement that, hey, this should be happening 25, 26. But I don't believe it. I think it's too quick, unfortunately. If there is a way, I'd love to see this happen. But what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are I'd like to serve students next fall that don't have CTE otherwise. I am not, again, I want to be absolutely clear that a student should go to their home CTE.
Yeah.
I am talking about students who otherwise would not have the opportunity to go to CTE.
What do you think about this amendment would help to facilitate that in a way that's currently not possible?
I think a couple of things. One, it clearly identifies the fact that that we will share information amongst the CTE centers for students that were either denied or waitlisted. I think that the language that's saying that I think there's importance in the intent of the language around transportation, so that anybody, any constituent can see that actually in law, we made a point of saying this year that they may have transportation. It's not a given, but they can ask and it may be provided. In our case, we intend to provide it. And I think that the intent of starting very next year of this body saying this is so important that even though we know it's in law, we're emphasizing it because kids need CTE and we should all be creating ways for kids to get CTE. That's what I think the intent is here.
So more for emphasis.
For emphasis and clarity, I think there is a need for clarity around sharing of the information of what kids are denied so that we can make sure to reach out to them.
And I ask a follow-up question about that piece because I believe if the amendment was written, it would be the sending district that would have to provide the information on students who were waitlisted because it's their directory information. Is that your understanding as well?
My hope would be that if centers contiguous to me, for example, had students that were turned away, that they would be free to give me that information so I could call the parent and say, I understand that your student wants to take an diesel. We have a spot. Would you like to come to her?
So full transparency, I'm an attorney who's not licensed to practice law in Vermont. But as I understand FERPA, I am licensed to practice law in places for that in Vermont because I don't want to. But as I understand FERPA, the parent or guardian would have to consent because they don't have, the CT center doesn't, until the student enrolls at the CTE center, they cannot legally share the information because it's not their student and it's not directory information. It's the sending district's directory information. So there would have to be some process that would say whether a parent could or could not give permission, whether a parent or guardian gave permission to a CTE center to share information about their student's name, address, contact information with other CTE centers if appropriate.
That
And that would need to go through legal review from the lawyers who advised each of your schools.
as long as the parent and the child know that there's an opportunity for the student to go to CTE, that's the intent here. And I understand that this is complicated from the logistic legal standpoint. I see that everybody wants this. I'm wondering how to move it forward.
It sounds like what you're hoping to achieve can be accomplished now. And we could provide technical assistance to support. That's what I'm hearing.
Senator Williams.
So just in general, if it's predictable, it's preventable. We can see, we can see what we want to accomplish with this. We just need to get out in front of it. Because what we're seeing is a potential cliff. So somehow, if we had one common catalog that people could look at listed with all the schools and what's offered there, if it was that simple, maybe that would help. And it was shared among all the school districts. I don't know.
So, thanks, sir. So we've heard several times that everything's already in place to be able to do what we need to do, with the exception of obviously cost differences and potentially transportation. But Dr. Good touch. Big touch.
That's what they got.
I'll wind that on page 2, paragraph E, starts on line 8. Is that the directory information this is a new request. I'm just curious if it's really a new or, from all this conversation, is that the bit of legislation here that might be at all useful that's not already in existence, or is it already in existence? Just need to know if there's elements here. This is really a question for AOE. Page 2, line 8. So the amendment. It's all about the directory information. That's all. Just look and see if there's anything to stop.
That's the question around what's allowable under FERPA. I think that's an open question and that we can confirm with our legal counsel.
Thank you.
But I think the consent from our understanding is that there need to be consent from the parent to share that information. That could happen in this current context.
Right.
But we can do a follow-up and make sure that you provide in writing from our legal counsel any further clarity.
FERPA provides direct, very clear how to share information and what you need to have to be able to share information. We could certainly provide the technical assistance to provide that language that could then be used by those who are communicating with families.
Thank you. Senator Hinsdale.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think this is a really critical change to make. And we go through rulemaking processes all the time so that it can be implemented in a way that doesn't conflict with federal law or student privacy needs. But I'm curious, Ruth, if you had seen that template that Jody had given out to folks that essentially says
I had seen.
you're on your own.
I had seen that early on. I had not seen that in the last. I did not know that these conversations were, I didn't know that Hannaford was able to provide transportation.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that Randolph was exploring how to provide transportation. And I know that the language that Jody shared was the language that was consistent for developed in light of the statute as written. So she shared that information in the past where I didn't know were the particulars that we've been discussing today.
Do you think, having now heard what that language is, that AOE could provide assistance for there to be better language than telling kids you're on your own?
I think we can help VACTED agree on language that all centers are comfortable in sharing. We can provide 2 or 3 different versions of language and they can discuss what will be most appropriate. Or they can choose that in a given region, they're going to use this language and in a different region, they could use that language.
Okay, because I'll just, and I know we have to end. I'll just end by saying this. I really want to thank you, Dr. McTavish. When the CTE centers came in the beginning of this process and said they felt left out and that they hadn't been communicated with, I really felt sympathetic. And I told them, this process is hard if you don't have a lobbyist, but I will be here to work with you on language because it's that important to us. And you were extremely persistent. And I think, to your credit, you worked with Patty Comline, who knows this system as a former legislator better than most. And I want to thank you for giving us some of the only actionable language that we've received that is statutorily drafted from any source on CTE. So I just really, wherever this goes, I do think it should advance. I just want to appreciate you because you have accomplished a great deal without a fancy title of an organization or anything. That's been really, really critical. So thank you very much.
Yes.
I just want to make another note that the State Board of Education has an intent to modernize the CTE rules, and they have established a committee. We have already outlined those aspects of the rule that can be modernized and updated absent legislative changes. It was our hope that we would have legislative changes this year to do a whole scale update of those CTE rules, but we were contemplating that may not happen and that there could be a plan B to moving forward with modernizing the rules of what we could update absent legislative changes. So I want to signal that work has been done. We have shared with the State Board of Education those specific aspects of the rules that could be updated. And we actually have shared a timeline for modernizing those rules that we have agreement on with the state board. And now knowing that we will be absent major legislative changes, there will at minimum be the opportunity to modernize the rules under the current law. I also think it's important to note for the record that there was a comprehensive approach for CTE reform that was introduced this session. And there has been work that's been happening with different committees. And it has been our intention to host joint hearings as much as we could throughout the process to create that strategic alignment. So I think that there has been a lot of work and there is a tremendous amount that we can build upon to move this forward next session.
And next fall for kids.
And next fall for kids, we will be providing that technical assistance to support the different centers in really maximizing these opportunities and making sure that there's clarity around how to take advantage of these programs. Absolutely.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I just still want to move this language.
What do we want to talk about this today, or we want to talk about it tomorrow, or what do people think? Well, we need to get the letter, right? We need to get information from AOE about that.
The one where we can follow up on legal
Yes.
counsel or
Yeah.
around that.
Yes.
I think we can.
Okay.
We'll start that.
We need to wait for that. We
Mhm.
need to have that. Okay.
Okay.
So we'll probably get the, well, we don't know yet. It's not even on notice yet. So we got a couple days.
Okay, great.
Okay. Good. So I think then we are done for the day. Thanks everybody for